In last week's podcast, we explained some of the more common verbs that are followed by either a gerund or an infinitive. So this week, you'll learn about some verbs that can be followed by both a gerund and an infinitive, but with a slight change in meaning. Welcome to
Aprender Inglés with Reza and Craig.
Hello and welcome to the podcast. If this is your first time listening, you're very, very welcome. Hello. And if you've come back to listen to us from previous times, thank you very much for joining us. My name's Craig.
And my name's Reza.
And we're teachers with nearly 60 years of experience between us. We'll use that experience to help you improve your English and take it to the next level. How are you doing, mate?
I'm feeling good. I'm feeling fine. And I'm ready for podcasting. What about you?
Me too. Really excited to be podcasting again after a lovely coffee break. Now, if you haven't already listened to last week's podcast, we definitely suggest doing that first before you listen to this week's episode. So go to inglespodcast.com/553 and listen to that episode talking about the basics of gerunds and infinitives.
But now we're going to raise the level a little bit.
Raise the bar, so to speak.
Raise the bar, yeah, makes things a bit harder. So you already know, if you've listened to episode 553, that some verbs are followed by gerunds and others are followed by infinitives. But there are some followed by gerunds and infinitives, but with a change in meaning. It depends on whether it's the infinitive or the gerund which follows it. For example, a very important verb in English is the verb stop. Stop can be followed by an ing, but it can also be followed by infinitive too. Let's talk about the difference. Craig, what is the meaning of stop plus a gerund?
When it's followed with a gerund, stop means the action or the activity is not happening anymore. It's finished. For example, and this is true, I've stopped drinking coffee with caffeine because I couldn't sleep well at night, and also I've got high blood pressure and I'm taking medication to lower my blood pressure. So drinking coffee with caffeine is something I've stopped. I've stopped drinking coffee with caffeine. I've stopped doing it.
So that coffee you had earlier with me, was that a caffeine-free coffee?
It was a caffeine-free coffee, yeah. And it was very nice, actually. So I'm getting used to it. Now, when we follow stop with an infinitive, it's a slightly different meaning, isn't it, Reza?
Yes, stop plus to, infinitive, means that someone or something stops an activity so that they can do something else, another activity. For example, we stopped working. By working, I mean recording this podcast. Yeah, we stopped podcasting. Why? To have a coffee break. That's the reason why. So we stopped one activity. We stopped working. We stopped recording the podcast so that we could do another activity, which was to have a coffee. So I stopped working to have a coffee break. And did you notice that we also have an ing there? So we said what we stopped doing and it's not happening anymore. That's with the ing. I stopped working. And then I say the activity that we're now going to do to have a coffee break. So in fact, stop often goes with both the ing, gerund, and the infinitive. I stopped working, ing, to have, infinitive, a coffee break.
I remember years ago when I was a smoker, I used to stop teaching to smoke a cigarette and then continue teaching if I had a break. I used to stop doing something to have a cigarette. But now I've completely stopped smoking. I don't smoke anymore. I've stopped the activity of smoking. Our next verb is try. Now, when try is followed by a gerund, a verb plus ing, it means that you're trying something as an experiment, especially as a possible solution to a problem, just to see if it works or not. For example, If your remote control isn't working, you can't change the channel on your TV, you might say to someone, have you tried changing the batteries in the remote control? Have you tried changing the batteries? So when try is followed by a gerund, just think of the word experiment. You're doing an experiment as a way to see if it works or not. Another example, my car isn't running. Well, have you tried pushing it? Try pushing your car and putting it in first gear. Maybe that will help.
Try plus an infinitive with to means that something is difficult, but you're making an effort to do it. For example, I'm trying to learn a new software program, but it's very complicated. But I am trying plus an infinitive to learn. I'm making an effort. I'm trying to learn.
Reza, I've been trying to lose weight for a long time. Do you have any advice for me using the verb try?
Yes. Try cutting down on sugar.
Good advice. Remember and forget are two verbs that can be followed by the infinitive or by the gerund, but there is a difference. Let's look at the gerund first. So remember and forget, when they're followed by a gerund, that refers to having a memory of something in the past or not having a memory of something in the past. For example, I remember studying French in school. Or with forget, I'll never forget doing our first podcast. So forget and remember, when it's referring to the past, use the gerund. What about the infinitive, Reza?
Well, remember or forget plus an infinitive to refers to recalling. That means having it in your mind, or forget, not recalling, that there is something we need to do, but before we do it. For example, please remember to send us a voice message. So remember plus infinitive to send us a voice message. So we want it to come into your mind, and then after that you send the voice message. Or with forget, I forgot to tell you about my idea for this year's podcast. I forgot to tell you. I didn't recall. It didn't come into my mind. Forgot plus infinitive to tell.
Our next verb that can have the gerund or infinitive is regret. So regret with a gerund, when it's followed with a gerund, means that you feel bad about something. You have a regret. You feel terrible about something you did or didn't do in the past. For example, I regret not studying Chinese at school. Or, and here's a joke just to warn you, Reza, and warn you listeners, I regret going to the chess players' Christmas dinner. It took them 3 hours to pass the salt.
Very good. Very good.
What about regret plus infinitive?
So if it's infinitive, it's a formal structure. Yeah, it's pretty formal generally. And it means that you are sorry to give bad news. And it very often goes with words like inform or say or tell. For example, we regret to inform you that we cannot offer you the job as chocolate taster in our factory. Oh, Craig, that would be
shame.
Hard news, wouldn't it, to take?
I almost regret applying for it.
So regret plus infinitive to inform, we have some bad news to give you. As we said, it's always informal. So you wouldn't say to a friend, I regret to tell you. It's too formal. You would say to a friend something like, I'm sorry to tell you, but we regret to inform you is a formal way of giving bad news.
We often hear that in London with the transport system over the loudspeaker on the station platform. They say, we regret to inform you that the next train has been cancelled. Please take the bus replacement service.
Yes, that is an essential phrase to know. If you ever travel on any train in the southeast of England, you will hear that. So you do need to know it.
I feel like giving them a can of olives. And when they say, what's this? Say, this is my money replacement service. Okay, I think it's time for a short break. Let's stop for a minute to talk about how you can improve your spoken English. Did you notice that? Verb plus infinitive. Let's stop to talk about how you can improve your spoken English. If you have been trying to speak more fluently, there's another one. Trying to speak more fluently. If you've been trying to increase your confidence when you have conversations in English, I think my conversation courses can help you. You'll be speaking with me and a small group of lovely, motivated students on Zoom, and together we'll have discussions, debates, role plays, and some fun activities that are all focused on helping to make you a better and a more confident English speaker. If this sounds like something you might want to try, send me an email to Craig, Craig, at inglespodcast.com, and I'll give you more details. So now let's get back to the grammar. Go on is another example that takes the gerund or the infinitive, go on. With the gerund, you could say she went on talking about her trip, which means she continued the same activity of talking. And this is often used as a sign of annoyance when something annoys you. Oh, she went on talking about it for hours and hours. It drove me crazy. Or you could say she does go on a bit, which means she keeps talking about the same thing and doesn't stop.
But go on plus infinitive is an entirely different thing. It is when you move on, you change to a new activity. So it's not a continuation. It's quite the opposite. It's stopping one activity or finishing one activity and changing or developing into a new activity. For example, imagine my friend had been talking about what she's doing at the moment. And then I say, then she went on to talk about her plans for the future. So she stopped talking about what she's doing at the moment, and then she changed and she went on to talk, infinitive, about her plans for the future. That's the next thing that she did. She went on to do that.
I've just thought of an example that also might help to clarify a little more. Imagine someone goes to university, and you could say after leaving university, by the way, there's a preposition with a gerund, after leaving. After leaving university, he went on investigating the use of AI in education. So if he went on investigating, that means he continued the same activity. Maybe he did a degree in AI in education and then continued with it. He went on investigating. But if I say after leaving university, he went on to investigate, then I'm changing the focus. Maybe he changed his area of study.
The next word we've got for you is mean, a word which...
What does mean?
Exactly. It has more than one meaning.
Meaning.
It could be the adjective mean. For example, if you're a mean person, it could be that you're miserable, you don't like spending money, you're just not very nice. You're mean. But we're talking about the verb mean, to mean, which also means two things. It means...
What does it mean?
In other words, signify. So the word mean can mean signify in the sense of being a doctor means working long hours. It signifies. That is mean with a gerund. Being a doctor means, it signifies, it implies working long hours. It involves that. It requires working long hours. That's what it signifies. That's what you've got to do. That is mean plus a gerund. But mean with infinitive, for example, I meant to call you yesterday, but I didn't, means I intended to call you. It was my intention. I intended to do it. That is mean plus infinitive. And it's an irregular verb, as you've just heard. To mean, and the past is meant, and past participle meant.
Our last verb that takes the gerund or the infinitive is need, N-E-E-D. when you have need followed by a gerund, that means requires. For example, I think my car needs washing. It requires washing. And when it's followed by an infinitive, that means you have an obligation to do it, or you feel that you have to do it. I need to wash the car. Okay, so gerund, the car needs washing. There's a necessity to do it. And I need to wash the car. I feel like I have to do it. Very similar, but a slight difference in meaning.
Craig, I got a question for you. We spoke about the word stop. It was our first example. Stop plus ing and stop plus infinitive have different meanings. What about start? It started to rain. It started raining. Same or different meaning?
For me, it's the same with that example. Do you agree?
Yes. So there's always a few strange exceptions, aren't there? So the verb start can go with an infinitive or it can go with a gerund with exactly the same meaning. It doesn't make a difference. It started to rain is the same as it started raining. That's the strange exception.
Very good point. And now it's your turn to practice your English. Can you think of some personal examples using 2 or 3 of the verbs that we've mentioned? Why not send us a voice message and tell us your examples? You can do that by going to SpeakPipe, that's speakpipe.com/inglespodcast, or you can reach us by email. Send your emails to me, Craig, at inglespodcast.com, or to Reza at belfastreza@gmail.com.
If you're a Spanish speaker and you want to improve your English with free or paid resources, you could visit the Mansión Inglés website. It's at mansioningles.com. And for specifically paid products, you can also browse the online store. That's at store, S-T-O-R-E, store.mansioningles.net.
And the fact that we bring you a new podcast each week is partly due to our lovely Patreon supporters who help us to produce this podcast. And you too can become a Patreon supporter and get instant access to the transcriptions of this podcast so that you can read every word that you hear. And also, every so often we have live Zoom chat so that you can jump onto Zoom and have a casual, informal conversation with me and some of our lovely Patreon supporters. If you would like more details, go to the website patreon.com, that's patreon.com/inglespodcast, or just follow the link in the show notes to this episode at inglespodcast.com/554.
As we always do, we'd like to say thank you to all of our Patreon supporters. We'd like to say everybody's name, but it's quite a long list and we just don't have time. So, as usual, we will just mention the name of our most recent supporters who joined this month, and they are David Santana Rubiales, Ezequiel, Fatima, Ángeles, Genesis Cañizares, and Priscilla. A big thank you to you and all the other Patreon supporters.
And on next week's podcast, we're going to continue with our theme of gerunds and infinitives and look at some more complicated and maybe not so commonly used verb patterns that go with using the gerund and the infinitive. So join us for our third and final part of our gerund infinitive series next week. Until then, have a lovely week. Thank you for joining us. It's goodbye from me.
And it's bye-bye from me.
If you enjoyed this podcast, please tell a friend or two so that we can expand our listener base. And the music this week is by Pitts. The track is called See You Later.